Welcome to Risk Roundup. Irrespective of private or public, most of the critical infrastructure, as seen across nations today, has been present in one form or another for quite some time. However, it is only recently that the critical infrastructure has become dependent on information communication and digitization technology. The critical infrastructure across nations, its government, industries, organizations, and academia, in short referred to as NGIOA, today uses many software applications to manage not only client-side business processes, but also to control some very sensitive operational processes and physical functions. The digitalization of critical infrastructure such as the electric grid, water supply, transportation, financial systems, healthcare, health systems, and emergency services have benefited significantly from greater integration of information communication and digitization technologies, in short referred to as ICDT, to make systems at all levels, local, national, regional, global, more efficient, more resilient, and more reliable. While the integration of ICDT has digitalized and modernized the critical infrastructure, it has also opened itself up to a contested territory as cyberspace is a contested commons and which it is growing increasingly complex and sophisticated, bringing critical security risks to not only the critical infrastructure but each one of us across nations. This necessitates security of the ICT-enabled critical infrastructure and its accompanying industrial control systems from cyber criminals and cyber attacks. To discuss this further, I'm honored to welcome Philip Reitinger. Philip is currently the President and CEO of Global Cyber Alliance. He has a very distinguished service record, and in some of his prior roles, he has served as Sony Senior Vice President and Global CISO. He has also been appointed by U.S. Department of Homeland Security, Department of Secretary Janet Napolitano to serve as the Deputy Undersecretary for the National Protection and Programs Directorate and has been the Director of the National Cybersecurity Center. Welcome, Philip. We are honored to have you on Risk Roundup.
Thank you very much. I'm pleased to be here.
Wonderful. So, as the increasing digitization and automation of nations' critical infrastructure provides more cyber access points for cyber criminals to exploit, there is a growing fear of cybercrime and criminal activities that would impact not only cybersecurity but also geosecurity and space security. The advances in the availability and sophistication of malicious software tools and the fact that each new technology from cyberspace raises new security issues that cannot always be addressed prior to adaptation or adoption in cyberspace, geospace, or space, in short referred to as CGS, is a cause for great concern and a critical risk facing each individual and entity across NGIOA. So how can any nation secure its infrastructure, critical infrastructure, with the growing digitization and automation challenges in CGS, that means cyberspace, geospace, and space?
Well, I'd suggest two things. First off, there is a need in the long term to simply change the game. As you suggest, and quite rightly so, the risk we are all facing around the globe is soaring upward. And in point of fact, there's really no way to change that. I like to point to what I call the 3 C's: complexity, connectivity, and criticality. So we have more and more devices that run increasingly complicated pieces of code. And as you say, that creates more connections. Those devices are all connected to the internet for lots of good reasons. And we depend on this array of devices and the software that those devices run more and more every day, week, month, and year, not only as we used to for entertainment, but for mission critical functions of our lives. All of those things are not going to change. We are going to keep using more complicated software and more devices. They are all going to be connected to the internet, and we will depend on them more and more every day. You can say you're going to change them, but you're not. That means our risk is going to continue to go up. And for that, we need to fundamentally change the game. We need to change the underlying structure of the way we do security on the internet. And I'm happy to talk more about that. Until we do that, we've got to focus very much not on the big problem, not on the issues that we could write about and enjoy producing reports on for years. We've got to focus on the strategic through the very much the lens of the tactical. And that's what the Global Cyber Alliance is trying to do. We recognize that these trends are not going to change in anywhere the near future. And so instead of working on reports and recommendations, we try and find areas of systemic risk where there's a solution that isn't being implemented. And instead of thinking about how could one solve this issue, we work to implement the solution and describe the degree to which risk was reduced. So we focus on eradicating risks, starting by mitigating them, and then working towards eradicating them in the long term, the way the medical community has eradicated pathogens like polio. The other thing that we need to focus on, and we're specifically focused on in the Global Cyber Alliance, is learning much more about how to measure systemic risk. This is called the Risk Roundup. I'm sure you have listeners and you who are much more familiar with the degree to which we can calculate enterprise risk. We can do it, but it still tends to be something very much of a red, green, blue, sort of a traffic light standard. And you can get to numbers, you can get to a 5-level standard, but actually trying to get to quantitative dollars remains difficult. We actually want to take it a step farther and work over a course of years, much as we are very much sort of attention deficit disorder focused on specific tactical items in the project space. In the long-term space, we want to instrument a means of measuring systemic risk, because it is only when we can actually measure and even model in advance what mitigations will be effective that we're going to have a science for reducing risk. And so that's what we're all about.
You are absolutely right about that. We don't have at this point effective tools and technology to be able to measure these interconnected and interdependent systemic risks. So I'm glad that your organization has taken an initiative to develop such tools, to develop solutions, and to implement those solutions. So that is, we do need organizations like yours who are, actively looking towards finding what is missing and what needs to be there, and to go ahead and provide solutions to all organizations, all entities across nations, government, industries, organizations, and academia. And we want that to have effective ability to be able to bring solutions to these very complex risks that we are facing, because we cannot stop progress and development. Science, progress, and development is going to continue. So that means more and more new technology is going to come. It could be from Internet of Things, it could be from cyberspace, it could be from artificial intelligence. We just have to understand those technologies. We have to understand what risk it brings to us, and we have to prepare ourselves with effective solutions. So that is one of the reasons we started Risk Roundup, that we want to understand, evaluate all these emerging areas, and we want to create education and awareness for everyone to understand that these complex risks are there. That doesn't mean we have to be afraid of them. We have to put together effective solutions so that we can have the benefits of the technology and the advances, and at the same time we can manage our security risk effectively too. And that's another area we really like to address, is that all these risks are integrated, interconnected. That means in a nation, industries, organizations, government, academia, and individuals, they're all interconnected now, and we need effective frameworks. We need effective risk management frameworks so we can identify the interdependent risk, interconnected risk facing all of us. At the same time, computer code, connected computers, and internet has connected the geospace with cyberspace and space. So we need to have an integrated approach that connects all of that. So I'm glad that your organization is doing what it's doing, and we would love to know more about that as we continue to talk on Risk Roundup today. So now let's another area, that is that irrespective of digitization, protecting NGIOS, critical infrastructure, has always been one of the primary role of nations. Now, in a digital global age, as nations increasingly become more dependent on digital communication, information and communication technology networks, They are being increasingly threatened by cyber attacks and cyber warfare. Now, while the nature of the critical infrastructure assets to be defended has undoubtedly changed over the years as we go deeper and deeper into the digital global age, the nature of the security threats has remained essentially the same. So, how has protecting critical infrastructure in cyberspace, geospace, and space changed fundamentally in the digital global age?
Well, it's certainly become a lot more complicated. And you see this issue coming up all around the globe. Certainly, it was foreseen when the Department of Homeland Security was established about 13 years ago in the United States because it was given a cyber role. And notably, when the Department of Homeland Security in the United States did its first quadrennial Homeland Security review, it was very interesting that it elevated cyber risk to one of the top 5 risks that infrastructure and the homeland in the United States faced. You see it in Europe with the completion and moving forward on the NIS directive, the Network and Information Security Directive, which specifically deals with several sectors and the need to protect them and approaches to ensuring that governments can protect infrastructures from cyber attacks. All that said, I don't think anybody's figured out exactly how to do it. You see fits and starts. So it's been the mantra around the globe for a while that we need a public-private partnership. And that's quite certainly true. As you said in your opening comments, the vast majority of critical infrastructure is in private hands around the world. And in many of the more industrialized democracies, it's well over 90%. So governments are a little bit at sea. It is relatively easy for them to police the borders and to make it more difficult to get bombs into a country and to arrest people in the physical world. All those things are much more difficult in the online world. It brings, I used to say that it's kind of hard to do policing in a war zone. And quite arguably, as you suggested before, the entire internet is a war zone. If it's not, the war zone's at your doorstep. And what's the right role of government remains very controversial. I believe public-private partnerships are essential. That's one of the reasons my organization exists. But it's also the case that I think governments and a lot of private sector companies are increasingly making the realization or reaching the realization that public-private partnerships alone won't do what we require. In the United States, for example, there are performance-based regulations for chemical facilities that require meeting certain standards, if you will, high-level performance standards in cybersecurity. You see that with the NIS directive and other approaches in Europe and around the globe. But in the United States, there remains a very strong driver against additional regulatory obligations. I think that is a temporary obstacle. I believe additional regulations will come. There's going to need to be at least a common lower baseline for the degree of security because we simply can't continue to live with the environment we have right now. And with the spread of the Internet of Things and more use of industrial control systems, again, which you mentioned before, the connections between the physical world or the geo world and the online world are becoming more, and the barrier is disappearing. And when cars start to crash regularly and smart cities are taken offline and emergency services disappear, in some cases not by intentional attack, but by inadvertent actions of individuals, people will start to get serious. I think that industrial control systems and the Internet of Things are a great place where we really need to put the thought in right now. I remember when we went through the mobile revolution and people said, let's not relive what happened in desktops. And things are better in some ways, But in many ways, they're not. In many ways, we're repeating in the mobile experience what happened in the desktop experience. I actually believe the transition to the cloud has potential significant security advantages by centralizing services and requiring those best capable of providing security to do so. But the Internet of Things could be a positive trend if it's done the right way, but I don't think that's as likely as a significantly negative trend. And you will see the broad panoply attacks, not just based on confidentiality, but integrity-based attacks, availability-based attacks that actually don't attack maybe even individual devices, but affect the entire ecosystem in a way that causes a autoimmune response, if you will, that is negative. So we live in a brave new world.
Yes, yes, definitely. And like you said, the public-private partnership is essential, but I think there is a need to put structure on that public-private partnership. Just by issuing a guideline that public and private entities need to work together, it's not going to happen. People are not going to just wake up one day and decide that we need to start working together. So there needs to be a structure to how to work together. Now, while NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, they have come up with a good, first initiative by, developing the cybersecurity risk management framework. It is just a baseline, I would say. There still needs to be a lot of work that needs to be done, because there are fundamental, gaps in that. And I'm sure that, in the coming months and years, we'll see some, advances or the, issuance of, more guidelines to make it better and more effective. At this point, it is just a basic, guideline and basic standard that each and every entity across organizations need that. But when cyber technology has a potential to destroy any nation, smart cities, its power lines, water supplies, transportation, and energy and financial markets without shooting a single bullet, it is a cause of great concern. So, based on your experience, what do you think is the nature of strategic shift we will see in combating the cyber warfare, or even to just say in a very basic form, to manage the security risk effectively?
Sure. So true risk management is always going to be a domain of humans aided by machines. It's been my thesis for several years that that's only going to really be possible until a particular thing takes place. And I think things are going to continue to get worse for at least the next decade, when I think we might see trends like this take off. And that proceeds from the fact that I think that the good guys and women on the internet have one advantage, and that is, oddly enough, the size of the network. I said earlier that connectivity and complexity are negative risk trends, and they are. But it is possible to sometimes make the size of the network and the good network effects to be a security advantage. And I don't think that we will succeed. The good men and women will not start to have the upper hand. Defense will not start to win against offense, because right now offense almost always wins, until they turn the size of the network to their advantage. Until the internet is transformed in a way that lets machines make decisions at a very localized level based on what they observe. And then that data is percolated upward for higher level autonomous decisions. And the network is primarily responsible for defending itself with human correction of mistakes and having humans do the things humans do best, which is set policies, manage for risk, watch for Uber trends that machines won't find. And I would tell you, that my thesis for a number of years has been that there are three primary things that need to happen to enable automated machine collective self-defense. And that's greater use of security automation, much broader security interoperability, and the use of stronger authentication and identification throughout the network, so that you can have machines make decisions at internet speed based on real data about, for example, source and destination and what they're observing. And they can spread that and collaborate to implement those decisions in real time. So, the Department of Homeland Security, when I was the Deputy Undersecretary there, had a paper written about that. That was, I guess, now 5 years ago. And I haven't been moved off my position on that yet. I don't see any other way it's going to work. And I think that the Internet of Things is going to be a hugely risky expansion of information technology unless we use those devices as a means to help defend the network as privacy sensitive but security platforms that can observe malicious behavior and help the network react more quickly.
Oh, that's great. And how can I access that paper? The paper that you mentioned about, writing at Department of Homeland Security.
It's published at DHS. It's available online. So if you look for toward a healthy cyber ecosystem, I believe it's called, enabling security through automated collective self-defense, something like that. I should know the title off the top of my head, but I've gotten older and I don't remember those as well.
Okay, sounds good.
Enabling a healthy cyber ecosystem, DHS, you'll find it.
Okay, sounds good. I would definitely like to read that. Now, the critical infrastructure is global in nature. The global market and global supply chain for information communication and digitization technology products and services are all interconnected, interlinked, and interdependent, with security efforts requiring a global approach based on NGIO understanding of risk in CGS. Now, when it comes to cybersecurity, NGIOI, that means nations, its government, industries, organizations, academia, and individuals, recognizes that everyone, each NGIOI, are in this fight together with a need for everyone to set aside their own competitive interest to solve a problem that concerns all. That means the cybersecurity. So do we see necessary initiatives and framework based on the much needed acknowledgement of cybersecurity requirement across nations, not just here in United States, but in every nation? Do you see those kind of initiatives developing?
There are certainly initiatives around the globe to do things on a country by country and a regional basis. So I think we've seen the European Commission become more and more deeply involved. And there are other regional groups like APEC and the Organization for American States that have taken on cyber projects. I think the real international effort in this space is not keeping pace with the degree of the threat. There was a fairly large uptick in activity around the turn of the millennium with the G8 ministers. Sorry about the lighting. I'm not sure what's happening. The G8 ministers for justice producing a set of recommendations that, among other things, said there should be no safe haven for cybercrime. And then also the development and opening for signature of the Council of Europe Cybercrime Convention, which, while it sounds very Europe-centric, involved Japan, the United States, and Canada in the drafting. So it was more international. But other international instruments have not necessarily kept pace. One example of that, and I think a place for immediate need, is to do something around cloud data. So there's litigation around the world, including a rather well-known case in the United States where the Department of Justice is suing Microsoft to produce data you may know of held on a Microsoft server in Ireland. And that's proceeding apace. Those sorts of things are just going to take off. And it's not just people asking for data from the United States. There are data centers everywhere. There are data centers in India. There are data centers in Singapore. There are plenty in Europe. A lot will depend on where inexpensive power is available. And it is beyond question that every government, for both national security and public safety purposes, is going to occasionally need to get access to that data, because any investigation and prosecution of crime in the future will shortly involve, arguably, access to data held outside the country's borders. We have a broad structure called MLATs, or Mutual Legal Assistance Treaties, that support that activity now, as well as some entities, some instruments like the Cybercrime Convention. They're not up to the task. They do not support things like going directly to service providers and cabin when that can and when that can't be done, nor do they provide privacy protections for non-nationals when data is stored within a country. And in order to enable this infrastructure to do everything we need, that's going to be required. So that absolutely has to take place.
Yes.
In terms of, and, I haven't seen really any movement forward on that yet. I think it'll be a 10-year effort for sure, but we ought to get started sooner rather than later. In terms of international arrangements, I think the Council, or sorry, the European Commission is probably doing the leading amount of work right now. But I don't think I don't think the effort is nearly sufficient to the level of work ahead of us.
Right. No, you are absolutely right about it. Now, there's also another concern that many nations' grid infrastructure is aging beyond its projected life expectancy. And there are many reports that if we talk about United States, that the projected cost to modernize the grid with the new components to make it, digitally intelligent, digitally, if secured, would exceed almost $1 trillion. So who do you think that acknowledgement is that we need to go ahead and make sure that we take care of our aging infrastructure, and do you see any initiatives going forward for that?
No, I don't. I mean, I hate to be negative about it, but I've seen countries not putting their monies where their mouths are for more than a decade. It is common to have government officials, not only in the United States, but in other countries, talk about cybersecurity as the #1 threat that they face. And do we show that in our national spending patterns? Are we spending money to secure our digital infrastructures to the extent we're spending money to expand them so that they provide value? We are not. I've said to government officials in more than one country, if you're going to move forward on something cybersecurity related, don't talk to me unless you're talking in the billions. We're just not doing that. We're not acting. We are not. Our acts are not matching what we're showing, what we're saying aloud about the seriousness of the problem.
That is very true. That is very, very true. I mean, you hardly heard about, the mention of cybersecurity even in our own presidential primaries. So, I mean, that itself shows what our leaders, are thinking about, and what priorities are them, to them, because cybersecurity or cyberspace or digital global age or artificial intelligence, none of these things we are hearing, and the security is a complex and it's a NGIOA challenge now. It's not that, government will be able to manage security for every one of us. It's an integrated effort that is going to be required in the coming days and months because of the, challenges that changes we are going through in because of the computer code, that it's everyone will have to get involved in security of their respective nations. But we will see when those changes are acknowledged and when those changes will be implemented. Now, the digital intrusion into the critical infrastructure threatens not only electronic data assets, but as we are talking, that it impacts our geospace also, and our satellites in space, and so everything is interconnected: cyberspace, geospace, and space. But the interconnectedness and interdependencies are making the job for security professionals very difficult. There's a growing concern that we, the humans, will not be able to manage the cybersecurity risk, or even the CGS security risk with our human intelligence and efforts. There is going to be a need for non-human, that is artificial intelligence and the machines, as you were just describing, to manage cybersecurity risk or critical infrastructure risk. And how are the nations preparing themselves for this, artificial intelligence involvement in security needs for their nations?
I I think people are just trying to keep their heads above water right now. I'm not so sure that there are, at least I certainly haven't seen significant efforts devoted to thinking about the long-term trends. I think academics are, um, but you might recall in the United States the president's announcement of the CNAP initiative a few months ago that involves significant budgetary implications in terms of throwing additional money at cybersecurity and proposing new initiatives. And I think most people's view is that for anything outside the administration that the president can do by executive order, it's a dead letter. It's just not likely to drive significant change, particularly during an election year at the end of an administration. And we don't know who the next leader of the country is going to be. People are occupied with other things. There are certainly things we could be doing. I don't know that people have internalized, this brave new world that we are moving towards. It is a wonderful world. I did a talk about a year ago about the Internet of Things to a group of very senior people, and I was talking specifically about the security implications of the Internet of Things, and noting that the Internet of Things was, for example, in the future, if you've got a set of hearing aids, because when you're older, as I am, your hearing starts to decline. They're not going to just, for example, automatically adjust to the noisiness of the environment. And they're not going to just be controllable by an app on your smartphone. If you're watching a television, they're going to hear the soundtrack and be able to pattern match it with a known cloud-stored broadcast. And instead of listening to the sound, you'll just get the audio piped directly into your head from the cloud. That's all great, but that means your hearing aids are connected to the world outside. And if somebody takes over those hearing aids, they could deafen you permanently. You're walking around with a permanent wiretap so that anyone can hear anything that you hear. Presumably law enforcement in the future, if they want to get a wiretap, are not going to plant a bug. They're going to get a court order to take over your hearing aids. And there'll be targets for lots of other people. Certainly executives would be targets for corporate espionage. And so we're going to live in this world where the basic foundations of security that we depend upon, that we are inviolate in our homes, will disappear because our homes will be smart homes and interconnected. And if we don't address that, we are going to continue to move down the road towards, people used to joke about the digital Pearl Harbor, which is completely an inappropriate analogy. A much better analogy is that we have to worry about digital Armageddon. And that's I think we will be too smart to get there, but we as a human race do not always engage in the most intelligent collective decision making. And now's the time for leaders to step up. The data is all there. There have been imminent and repeated reports about political campaigns being compromised, with the most recent one being the Democratic National Committee in the United States. The people know that they're targets. I think if you looked anywhere in the world, you would find significant politicians at risk towards criminal cyber intrusions or intelligence cyber intrusions. So one's got to think about how much more do we need before we start to treat the problem as serious as we ought to. And it needs to be, there needs to be a focus in academia, there needs to be a focus in civil society, and most of all, we need to see government start to act like they speak.
That is very true. Very, very true. See, there is also a concern that botnets that are the networks of compromised computers controlled remotely by a cyber attacker. Criminals use that to facilitate online schemes that's to steal the data or to steal funds, or like you were just mentioning, to hack into any organization or any politicians, to see their data, to anonymous and to be anonymous and do activities in cyberspace to deny access, like cyber espionage and all kinds of things. So these botnets are run by criminals, and they are used by cyber terrorists or nation states to steal sensitive data and raise funds or limit attribution of cyber attacks. All kinds of things are going on now. Today's botnets are often modular and can add or change functionality using internal update mechanisms. So that is the biggest fear, that the data will be manipulated and we won't even know it, because at this point we don't have effective tools to know that our computers are compromised or our smartphones are compromised or our smartwatches are compromised, and that the data is being collected, data is being manipulated. There are no effective tools at this point. So how are we going to know that how many computers are compromised at this point, and how to effectively manage those kind of risks?
So I'd say a couple of things about that. The first is we do need to get much better on the detection and response and mitigation end, so that we know when something is compromised and we can scalably isolate it and then mitigate the problem with the device. There are lots of technologies that can help you do detection, but it is certainly a smaller entity that was a significant target would have a lot of difficulty in defending itself from the threats that it faces. One could do it with spending a lot of money. There are great companies out there that will help you defend yourself, but it's nothing. We aren't in a world where it's more probably than not that you won't be compromised. The best defense right now is not being a target. And the tack, to go to the second part of my response and your point about botnets, is that in a sense everybody's a target. What's not, if you're a bad actor, to like about a botnet? It is a broad platform that lets you detect things. It's a broad set of sensors, collect data, and do things, including modifying data or just sending packets, distributed denial of service attack to take people offline. So it's a grid, it's an electronic grid of computers that lets you strengthen what you can accomplish. The other place besides detection and mitigation that we need to get much stronger is in prevention. And that's where organizations like mine, the Global Cyber Alliance, come in. We are focused, we were funded by a lot of different things, including a significant grant that came from a law enforcement entity, the District Attorney of New York County. But we are focused on prevention of systemic risks. We're not going to, law enforcement itself has a great deal of difficulties, as I said before, enforcing the law in a war zone. Right now, even when you catch people and put them in jail, arguably the economic incentive is still to engage in cybercrime, because the chances of their getting caught in this broad network are pretty slim. So we've got to make it much harder. We've got to engage in prevention. And what my organization has decided to do is find the most significant systemic risks and try to tackle those. This gets specifically to the botnet question you pointed out, because the two main attack vectors you see on the internet right now are phishing and compromised websites, watering hole attacks, they're called. We got watering hole attacks in the future spectrum to tackle. But our first two projects, and we are very project-based, are to try to implement two solutions to restrict the availability of phishing to attackers. And one is the spreading of a protocol called DMARC that makes it much more difficult for, when entities deploy DMARC, to spoof emails, so that if you are in a company, it's a lot harder to get an email that appears to be one of your from your colleagues, but it's not. It's from a third-party attacker. The second is DNS-RPZ, and it's an effort to use the DNS service to stop efforts to compromise machines and then identify compromised machines. Both of these efforts could have a significant effect in reducing the ability to assemble botnets, and the DNS-RPZ project in the ability to take botnets apart. I think we also need to sort of mention a third point. There have been very significant and valuable efforts around the takedowns of particular botnets by law enforcement working with the private sector to essentially cut off the botnet at its head, to take the command and control infrastructure and repurpose it and help with mitigation. I think we'll see more of that, but the threat from botnets isn't going away. And with the Internet of Things, the threat from botnets is going to soar. One could imagine what you could do to an electrical grid with a botnet of smart meters. And that's almost a worst case scenario, and one that is actually within the realm of possibility.
Yes, yes, it is. And that makes me, come to a point to talk about, who is looking after all these security risks in organizations. If we look at currently, we have the title Chief Security Officer, we have the title Chief Information Security Officer. So a Chief Security Officer thinks mainly in terms of geo-security. That means they want to make sure that they have the entity that they are protecting, that they have enough, guards, security guards, or security weapons that they need, security gates that they need. Chief Information Security Officer thinks in terms of firewalls and antivirus softwares. But there are also many other areas that are largely absent in organization, the titles, the roles. Space security is still a largely absent topic. Nobody's talking about it. And perhaps, not everyone needs to talk about it. There are only few organizations that needs to actively work towards space security. But there's one area that is largely absent, and that really concerns me, is the strategic security. Because if you look at any entity across NGIOA, nobody's talking about that. And strategic security is so very important, because right now, because of the cyberspace, the business models are changing, the products are changing, the processes are changing, the governance models are changing, the way we do things, the way we bank, the way we manage things, everything is changing. So if you are an organization, a business within an industry or any entity, if you are sitting and thinking that yours is an established business model, mature business model, and you are good to go, you don't have to worry about the innovations or new ideas that are coming in, and that this cyberspace is not going to, innovations in cyberspace or artificial intelligence or any converging technologies that is coming your way is not going to impact your business model, you don't have to worry about it. So I think they are making a big mistake, because of so many changes are coming at such a rapid pace. Artificial intelligence and biotechnology, cyber technologies, and from any part in the world, there are so many new ideas and innovations are coming, and it's not necessary that those new ideas, innovations would come from within your sector. It could come from any sector, any industry, any country. So how are you going to protect your business or your venture, your initiative, if you don't know what threats are coming your way? And that only could be done by understanding the strategic security risk. But you don't see that role across, any entity and in any nation. They are not taking it seriously. So how would we be able to bring real security, cyber security? See, what I was coming, in my previous roundups, I had dialogue with several, key decision makers that, NIST, has come up with the cybersecurity risk management framework, and they talk only about information security. Information security is not cybersecurity. If we look at the risk portfolio of any organization, 75% is the strategic security risk. The ones that we are paying attention to: operational risk, financial risk, legal risk, compliance risk, That makes up only about 25%. The rest is 75% is the strategic security risk that is ignored. Nobody is paying attention to. So how are we going to make sure that we protect our initiatives, our organizations, our businesses, our products, services, or the way we do things in our country, in our nation? How would we protect them from the cybersecurity risk? What are your thoughts? Do you see any initiative?
Um, I think if I had the answer to that question, I'd be far more affluent and probably not working for a living. I see some things. There are some high general answers, which don't go completely to what you address with strategic security risk. You see this in the debate for to whom should the chief information security officer report, because there's sort of a split between people who think that person should report to the CIO and people who think that person should report somewhere else. I'm a big proponent, and I think the general trend in industry is to have a chief risk management officer. And the CISO should not be in the IT chain of command, but should be in the risk management chain of command, where physical risk and other risks should also be addressed. That doesn't answer your question about how do you take that into account, but it does give the mission to an organization to be able to look at the full panoply of risks an enterprise faces and be able to address them. Certainly for strategic risk, insofar as it hits business risk, the only way you're going to address that is actually building it into the DNA of the organization. So product planners and other people address those set of risks when they are designing what the business is going to do in the future. I might suggest that it feels to me like we're going to see more and more threat modeling going forward, threat modeling being something that came out of a number of places, but including information security and product development. And I think threat modeling is going to be a mechanism that much more broadly is used in overall business processes to figure out how one designs a business plan to address the various risks that may face, and you build in at the start mitigations for whatever might come about. You see this a little bit at the national level in terms of how to organize. It's been my view for a while that the Department of Homeland Security, for example, in the United States, should keep physical infrastructure protection and cyber infrastructure protection together, so that the entire question of infrastructure protection can be dealt with in a threat agnostic way, in a mechanism agnostic way. But I don't know that that's going to be the long-term solution that is going to be the result. We struggle, I think, we struggle very much with models for how to do the very complex, and I do mean complex, not complicated, risk calculations that are involved in that question. We're going to focus even in the long term on only the very limited question of how to measure systemic cyber risk, something that, to my mind, nobody knows how to do right now. So I guess I'm punting on the answer. I don't really think that there is an answer. I do think we've got to work on really building ways to measure risk. I'm going to tackle with blinders on the piece that I can make an effect on. Other people need to tackle the other pieces, and we'll need a lot of academic work on how to roll this all up into measurement of overall risk. I mean, right now we could throw Watson, the IBM computer, at the problem and try and address it in a single case, but I don't really have an answer for you other than that.
I understand that, and not I think nobody has a proper answer for that, because at this point, like you said, and like I've discussed before with some economists on risk conduct, that we don't have effective models by which we would know what is the economic impact of the cybersecurity or cyber hacks or cyber breaches, that any particular nation or any business and industry is going through. We just don't have those tools. So whatever numbers we are seeing, that this much impact is there on the GDP, this kind of cybersecurity risk, it is all not very accurate. So without having effective tools, we are not going to be able to know what is the true impact. And a lot of people are saying that, unless the impact is certain percentage to the GDP, the nations are not going to take it seriously. They would just take it casually, that this is the cost of doing business in cyberspace, so let's not worry about it. But at this point, my concern is that there are many computers that are hacked or compromised. We don't even know which computers are compromised. We don't know what intellectual property is stolen. We don't know what trade secrets are stolen. There are a lot of things we don't know. There are many unknowns. So how do we come up with sensible solutions when there is so much secrecy, there is so much information that is in silos? There is not enough collective information. And cybercrime is such a rapidly growing industry. Today's cyber criminals are so business savvy, and they have made cyber crimes as one of the fastest growing industry in nation's history. The investment that is required in this to grow your business in cyber crimes is so little, and the rewards are huge. So these criminals are building businesses based on the development, management, and sale of botnets, and they have very structured development centers with their own programmers, their own salespeople, and their own leasing sales, those kind of services. And so many young people are getting drawn to that. That is such a cause of concern, when many young people are getting drawn to this rapidly growing criminal industry. So how could any nation succeed in reversing the course for its youth? Because the lines between right and wrong have blurred so significantly.
That's a very good point. As I suggested before, I think there are some things that need to happen. One is that we need to work on the overall paradigm. As I said, we need to work on a fundamental shift so that the internet can be secured. Someone I know used to say that to defend a network, you need to have a defendable network that is adequately defended, and most of our networks right now are not defendable. On the adequately defended part, we've got to work on the personnel piece. We've got to get more people until we have a fundamentally more secure network, so that there are more cybersecurity workers to do the human-intensive job that will be required until we build out better automated tools and ways to address the problem. And then specifically to what you were just discussing, we've got to make sure we get to young people early. There are, I think it is sad but true, that there are people who would break into a computer system to see what was there, where they would never think about picking up a baseball bat and hitting someone over the head. And the fact that the harm could be just as great doesn't really occur to them. There are a lot of sort of gateway ways to get into that, and I don't want to argue one way or the other about things like the theft of intellectual property and free music and movies. But there's no sharp dividing line online about what's okay and what's not. And as a result of that, it can be more difficult to teach ethics and explain ethics to people. But I think it's absolutely essential to start training kids early in cyber ethics. Our current younger generation was raised in a way that I was not. I was a very cyber savvy kid. I got into programming well before I went to college when I was in high school, and I took courses, and I programmed with punch cards when punch cards weren't cool. But my youth was very different than kids now. They communicate in different ways. They have different ethics. Their sense of privacy with Facebook, and not with Facebook, sorry, that's an old fogey technology these days, but with Snapchat and Instagram is very different than what I have, and perhaps you as well. Again, I don't have an answer for it other than it really does require national programs and international understandings. It might be a naive and silly thing to say, but it seems to me that cyber safety is sort of a UN level issue in the sense that we need to reach people around the globe, and we need to give. This is less true in developed countries. But in lesser developed countries, we need to make sure that the really technology capable kids there have opportunities to succeed outside of criminal activity. Because if there's not a real business climate in a country, but computers well, your choice may be to earn nothing or earn a significant amount in a quasi-criminal activity. And we just shouldn't. I mean, that's a violation of a basic human right, I think, to ask people to make that decision. And so we've got to do better.
Yes, we do need to do better in that area. Now, you have, Phil, worked in cybersecurity, several different, angles from Homeland Security to, working at Sony to Microsoft. Many organizations you have worked. What is based on your experience with different roles that you had over the years and working so closely with the security challenges coming from the cyberspace and because of information communication and digitization technology, what is your biggest takeaway from your years of effort towards securing critical it could be critical initiatives, it could be critical businesses or critical infrastructure?
This is going to be a reference back to the organization I'm in right now. My biggest takeaway is that the most important thing in cybersecurity is to do something. It almost doesn't matter what the something is. People need to worry about making a change in the things that they can control, which is why the mission statement of the Global Cyber Alliance is do something, measure it. So we're a nonprofit focused specifically around finding things that need to get done and trying to do them. But that shouldn't just be a mission statement for us. It should be a mission statement for everything. I think, and I've said this before, I think the person who first taught me that was Scott Charney, who is sort of the chief security officer for Microsoft. Before that, he's my boss at Microsoft, and he was also my boss at the Department of Justice when I was in the computer crime and intellectual property section. And, that was very much his view. Find something and get it done. And I think that's really the big takeaway. Don't admire the problem. Don't get lost in the complexity. We spent a lot of time talking about how we don't have these models and all this other stuff. So then develop a model, implement a model, install a firewall, teach your kids, just do something. And it's better to fail. Let's use a startup ideology. If it fails, if it doesn't do what you want, do something else. But try every day or week to get something done. That's my biggest takeaway. And look, I can tell you, I think there have been a lot of places I wish I would have done better. I've worked on awareness raising in several government roles. And I have manifestly not put a delta on the awareness problem yet. And now I don't know if that's my incapabilities or the problem or a combination of the two. But I feel good about the efforts I've made, and I want everybody to try to do the same sort of thing. It's I like to reference. Do you know
that's good advice? Very good advice, Phil.
Do you know the Theodore Roosevelt Man in the Arena speech?
It
was given at a college graduation, and I wish I had it in front of me. I've read it to so many people, but the theme of it is that it's not the critic who counts. It's the person who is in the arena every day, sweating and toiling, who fails again and again, and who at the end of the day may know great triumphs, but even if they fail, doesn't know, the cold quiet of the subtle critic. And that's I think what people need to do. They need to get in and mix it up.
Yes, very, very true. Very good advice. And that is just not important to identify the gaps, but it's also very, very important to to come up with effective solutions and to manage, to come up with products, services that we need. If we talk about cybersecurity challenges, it's important to identify the security risk as we are identifying right now. But that is only the first step. We do need to identify, come up with effective solutions, effective models, products, services that we require to manage the risk coming from cyberspace, an integrated risk coming from cyberspace, geospace, and space. So Phil, thank you so much. I'm sure our global viewers and listeners are going to benefit tremendously from what you had to say today. It was a great dialogue, and I know you are such a busy man, and in spite of your busy schedule, you agreed to come on Risk Roundup and spend almost an hour. I think we are off by a few minutes, but you spent that time and you took a very active interest in coming up with solutions, talking about your organization and your initiatives, what you're trying to do towards making a difference in the cybersecurity risks that we all are facing. So thank you so much for that.
Glad to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Wonderful, Phil. So the increased integration of information communications and digitization technology into the daily activities of nations, its government, industries, organizations, academia, and individuals, that is NGIOAI, along with the corresponding growth of cyberspace, geospace, and space, in short referred to as CGS, has been a major driver of economic growth and productivity. But just as cyberspace has created unprecedented opportunities for economic growth, it has also created unprecedented opportunities for security risk. How effectively NGIOAI work together toward the common goal of securing cyberspace, geospace, and space will ultimately determine how secure each one of us will be and the degree to which society continues to reap the benefits of living in the digital global age. Risk Group Cybersecurity Risk Research Center and Strategic Security Risk Research Center are created for this very reason, to identify, evaluate, and manage the risk facing NGIOA and CGS, and discuss, debate, and define necessary framework, structure, processes, tools, and technologies to manage the security risk of not only the digital global age, but also of the coming technological superconvergence. Let's manage the existing and emerging risks together. For more information on the Risk Roundups, to watch the Risk Roundup videos, or hear the Risk Roundup podcast, please go to riskgroupllc.com and do not forget to subscribe and share. Until next time, I'm Jayashree Pandya, host of Risk Roundup, signing off. See you next time. Thank you.